Wondering how your mindset affects your life? How to bring more energy into your business and life? Millions of people around the world ask these same questions daily. You are in the right place. Learn practices that will help give your life the meaning and success you've been searching for. Welcome to the Charge Podcast, teaching you how to create habits around real goals every day. Practical life advice from those who made it. Here's your host, Gary Wilbers.
Do you struggle with being negative? Most people struggle with being negative. Being positive takes action. Using simple positive actions will allow you to win each day. Being negative is a discharge in 3 key areas. Number 1, your mindset to achieve your goals. Number 2, your influence on self and others. And number 3, your ability to learn and grow. Implementing simple positive actions into your life will allow you to win each day. Being positive takes action, so let's work to be positive. To receive a weekly video email from me on one simple positive action, subscribe to the series by going to chargepodcast.com to get the link to register today. Life is short, so why live your life by default when you can live your life by design? Make it a great day. Welcome, Chargers. We're glad to have you back again this week for another great podcast. I tell you, I enjoy bringing different perspectives, different guests on with their expertise that you really get to learn and grow and really learn from others. And today I've got another great guest with us. Katie's with us. But before I tell you all about Katie, I want Katie to share with us, what problem will you solve for our listeners today?
I'm going to help your listeners demystify their role as a leader in creating a culture where people want to stay and feel engaged and be productive.
Oh, it's going to be a fun conversation. I can't wait because you all know I love leadership and I love talking about culture. We're going to get both of those with Katie McLaughlin. She provides leadership and culture transformation for mature startups, helping leaders create inclusive cultures, build emotional intelligence, work through their assumptions and biases so they can actually connect with and get the most out of their teams. She does this all through interactive, experiential, theater-based exercises. Her bias for action is high, so attendees to her sessions always leave with at least one action item to immediately do to shift something in your behavior, relationships, and even company. Working with Katie, you benefit from the powerhouse combo of her theater background and over 15 years in the heart of the business strategy, organizational development, and change management. Katie, it is great to have you on the Charge Podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited for today.
Well, thanks for joining us. There's so many different ways we can go with this, but I think let's start off with why it's so crucial for companies to build a happy and healthy workplace culture, especially as things have changed over the last several years. This one really comes up to why it's so important.
Yeah, especially in the last few years, I think many people are contemplating the role that work plays in their life. And because with so many folks working from home or doing a hybrid thing, they realize that connection between their work life and their personal life is even more important than it used to be. And so culture is one of those things that is really the glue within your organization that helps people feel a part of the company, a part of the mission, and that they get to bring their best self to work and can feel motivated and engaged.
Yeah, I think that's so crucial. And, for some of us that's older, I'm one of them on that. We have to change. I was at an event with some of my mastermind members just a few weeks ago, and I was talking about, it's not if you want to. The market is demanding us to change how we're doing culture and how we're working with our teams all the time. So I think really a good question and follow up with that is, of course, a lot of people talk about workplace culture. And, we want to have that culture. And we've heard all those things. I've written books about positive culture. And some get very mistaken, think it's all these things that you give them. And I'm not a believer in that. I doubt you are either. But the question I'm going to ask you is, how can you measure that workplace culture if it's successful or not?
So I encourage leaders to focus on 2 specific metrics. One is getting a hold of those elusive engagement scores. And I call them elusive because usually it's the talent, HR, people, whatever you call it in your organization. It's usually run by that team and frequently only shared with senior leaders. Now, if you're a small business owner and have no idea what I'm talking about, an engagement survey is just a survey that is anonymous and allows your employees to give honest feedback about how they feel about working for your company, how they feel engaged at work, and how they feel about leaders and what type of environment those leaders are creating for them. So that's kind of my first bit, is to start advocating to get access to that data. The next piece is, as an organization, you can use Glassdoor reviews as a way to get, again, that anonymous feedback. Now, we all, I think, know that the unhappy customers and the unhappy employees are the ones that are going to speak the loudest. But there's always some kernel of truth to people who have some kind of negative review. And it's important that we acknowledge that kernel of truth and look at ourselves and say, hey, is there something I could do that would help alleviate, that experience that someone had, so that way no one else has that experience?
Yeah, I think that's great because, when you get the feedback from those, you start to see some trends. I used to do surveys back when I had my wireless company. And I'll be honest, as an owner, when you first read them, you have to take some deep breaths. Because I felt like we did a lot of things, but the thing is, they were telling you where your weaknesses were. And the thing is, it normally took me, they were smart. My HR director would bring it to me on a Friday. And he said, well, let's discuss this on Monday, because he knew on Friday, he wanted me to be gone for a couple of days before he had to really discuss it. And what happened is, when I gave myself that time and space, it's like, okay, now what do we got to do to go fix this? And if you have that as leadership, that you want to make those changes and make it better, I think that becomes the real key. I think one of the challenges, though, and Katie, you talk a lot about this in some of the research that I saw, is companies now have to really showcase that culture, not just in person. Even I know with some of the work you're doing with the theater, you're doing it now even remotely there. But how do we take that culture and in the remote setting, create a culture too within our companies, instead of, oh, that's Johnny that works in, a whole nother state over, instead bringing them together?
Culture has never actually been about being in person. Like you were describing before, I like to think of it as people do the culture checklist, right? Where you're checking items off the list. And that checklist went away when we're not all in person in an office and, have all these events and things like that. And in reality, culture has always been in the in-between, the moments between all of those events, the moments when you give feedback on the fly and you don't even think about your tone. You don't think about how you're delivering it. You don't think about whether that individual is accepting and open to receiving feedback at that moment. The way that, so I use that example as one of those moments where you can put some intentionality, be deliberate about how you want to engage with someone. So that way you're influencing their experience of culture rather than it being a pure emotional reaction from the person on the other side. So it's all those little in-between moments. It's those moments when, you were going to meet one-on-one with somebody and you're chronically late. It's those moments when the individual at home remotely sits and is like, I don't know how to engage, or I don't know what to do next, right? Like there's this expectation that the company is going to help people to be engaged.
I was reading an article the other day as one of the things that people really want to know, and this doesn't matter if it's in person or remote, but they want to know you care.
Yeah.
As an employer, as a leader, do you care? And there's such simple ways to do that when you start out a meeting or anything, to be able to get them engaged in.
Well, and I would also share that it's not just about caring about their life outside of work. It's not just about whether or not if they have a family or a pet. It's about knowing what their dreams are, what drives them. Yes. What have they done at work that they've really enjoyed? And what have they done that they really hate? One of the cool things I think about the workplace today is that there's often a lot of opportunity for people to stretch and flex into different areas within their same role. So taking on a special project, assisting a leader with something that maybe is a little bit outside of their scope, but it allows them to start leveling up. And those are some of the small ways that as leaders, we can help to engage our teams that aren't just about, hey, what did you do this weekend?
Yeah, I think that's huge, is because one of the numbers out there on all the surveys that's out there is people want to be developed. And maybe they don't fully have that skill, but you put them on a team that can help them develop their skills. That becomes part of that engagement factor we see all the time. And with the pandemic, I mean, we have to figure out how are we engaging our people in the team, because if they're not engaged, they're becoming part of the great resignation. They're finding it somewhere else. So they're going to either find it in your organization or they're going to find it out. And you mentioned a couple of theirs, but is there any other things that you can think of besides developing them, getting them on the different teams to be able to help them really engage their employees?
Some other things you can do would be when you have, a team meeting, see if you can bring in, a little activity, or bring in, what I always like to do is bring in wins. We don't celebrate enough or recognize people enough in the workplace. We're so focused as leaders on improving our team members and teaching or coaching them, when in actuality, part of how we can help them to stay engaged and feel positive in the workplace is to both give them the stage to acknowledge wins, and for us as leaders to get better at calling out and recognizing, hey, this was great. And it's not big things. It can be really small things like, hey, I saw how the two of you really collaborated on this particular, thing. And I know you worked with somebody who's a little challenging to work with in another department. And so I just applaud you for getting that done or for collaborating together.
Yeah, I love that with the wins. I have a little thing that I do when I'm doing a leadership class. I call it positive focus. And the class has to share a professional and personal one. And I tell people right away when I do it, I said, this is your first leadership lesson that we're doing this morning. It's always the first thing that we do. And the reason is when people share that, of course, if it's a larger group, if it's in person, I'll have them get up. If it's online, I may have them share that in the chat that's there. So you just determine on the group. But man, if it's in person, the chatter just goes way up. They come in and of course they know nobody maybe, and they're all quiet and everything else, but it's like right away it raises up. And I said, you can do this in team meetings, really simple. And it doesn't take that long, but you're celebrating those wins. Like you said, specific is great too, but letting them share what their wins are. And it really helps people. And I think it changes the dynamic of meetings too. And especially today on Zoom, we've got to find ways to engage them in versus, okay, I could have came this as, okay, it's 11 o'clock. I've got a podcast to do with Katie. No, y'all want us excited. You want us to be here. So you're excited to listen to it. And I think it's the same way in meetings. We have to tune them in versus allowing them to tune out. And I think that's what you're saying.
And I love what you were describing about using the chat in addition to also like letting people share, come off of mute. Something else to consider is that some employees and team members need time to think about something. And so, I've known some folks who put together, a shared document where they can be capturing notes or agenda items before a meeting. And you could have a section there for celebrating wins, and people can add their different wins in there. And frequently it's kind of anonymous in kind of the shared document space, right? Where you don't have to put your name. And so that's another cool way that people don't have to feel like they're putting their neck out, but feel like they get to be involved and engaged.
I think that's some great elements there, and just great things that you can do to really make a difference to engage your employees, engage your team into it. And, because ultimately what we're looking for is that healthy and strong company culture. And you talk about this a little bit. What steps do you think companies have to look at to really build that type of culture, to have a strong and healthy company culture?
So one of the biggest things is about talking about why it matters. So if you're not talking with your team, with your leaders, so if you're a business owner and have leaders, or even just, a business owner or an individual leader, like you need to be talking about why the culture matters and educating yourself on these types of things around like the impact of culture. Because the more you start to talk about it, then the people who, report to you, look up to you, they're going to realize, okay, well, if my leader's talking about it, it must be important. The next piece would be doing some training or some coaching on your own blind spots as a leader, on how you can be addressing any ways that you might kind of be accidentally disrupting the culture or, introducing, we all have biases, we all have things to work on. And it's important that we all take some of that time to work on those things. So that way, when we do engage with our team members, we're taking that moment to be that intentional, deliberate leader, which is that's kind of the phrase I like to glom onto, as being someone who is deliberate about being a leader rather than accidental, just engaging someone off the cuff.
I love that because
there's a million other things.
Yeah, I know the biggest thing is for that leader to be self-aware. And I think that's the thing, is leaders, we've got to change, and we can put business owners, to me, that's interchangeably here, is we have to be more self-aware of what type and style of how we communicate to others and what are our blind spots that we have. I mean, I used to be one of them leaders. I'll be honest. I don't like it, Katie, but I was a pound the fist type guy, and this is what I've done. It was early in my career. And, the thing is, I became self-aware, and it's not like I'm perfect now. I'll be the first one to admit that. But the thing is, I have changed that. And I even give my team some things that if I do, because I'm the type that normally I'm in a hurry, I'm coming from one podcast to the next thing, to a coaching client and everything else. And if I say, I need this done, can you take care of this? And if they don't understand, I've given them a signal of do the timeout for me. And that means slow down. I didn't get you all that. Instead of me storming in, giving all the information, and storming by, I don't mean yelling at them or anything else, but just kind of passing it on. Instead, I allow them to slow me down when I need it, and
that's amazing.
Indicators there. And I think that's what leaders we can do. We're not going to be perfect. It's not about being perfect. It's about giving your people the capability to slow you down.
Yeah. Well, and what I loved hearing in that is that you were describing that you became aware of one of your blind spots. You educated your team about that blind spot, which is a level of vulnerability that all by itself establishes a level of trust. And you gave them a solution, right? So you weren't putting the burden of interjecting on a leader who is, responsible for their pay and their employment at the company, which creates this imbalance of power, right? You empowered them to have a tool to be able to engage and get what they need.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I tell you, it can be done for anybody. That's the reason I brought it out, is not that for me. I want leaders to know you can do that too. Let's talk a little bit about this, because as I looked at your website, this really intrigued me. You've been known to incorporate theater into your work and with teams. What is that like? And share with the audience what you do there.
I mentioned this power dynamic, right? And what that power dynamic does is it really prevents us from being able to engage with our leaders many times and express what's really going on. It doesn't always feel safe. So first and foremost, these theater exercises establish a level of safety, because we're kind of taking ourselves out of that, confrontational one-on-one environment. And we're turning common situations into kind of theater portrayals. We use our bodies, we use our facial expressions to kind of express what our real feeling is when we go into different situations. So the example you gave of, when you kind of blast in after a meeting or in between meetings and give something really quick, it's possible that your expression of what you're trying to convey is energetic and positive. And, if you were to create an image in one of my theater workshops, you might have your hands up and a big smile on your face and your eyes with lots of energy. But what your team might give an image of what they experience, it might be a overpowering, where your hands are kind of coming down like you're angry and gonna attack and like scowly on your face. That's a completely different perspective than what you're trying to convey. And so that can become an instant aha moment for a leader who hasn't done some of that work like you have to call that out. It's like, oh, hey, wow. So part of what I'm trying to convey is not coming across. And so now I can start to change, right? That awareness allows us to actually go into a path of change. If we don't have that awareness, we can't change. So those theater exercises that's just an example of what I use. And we do that both in a group setting, and I do it one-on-one with leaders as well.
Yeah, I can see how it really can impact, because it's from both perspectives, you're getting the full view, and it changes. What I talk about a lot is changes that paradigm, because as a leader, we've got to be willing to we see it only from our viewpoint. We've got to see it from the other viewpoint that's there. Katie, one other area I think is so important when we're talking about culture and just with the organizations and the change that we're having in organizations now is really in that area of diversity and inclusivity in the workplace. How can leaders really cultivate that culture of diversity and inclusion in the workplace?
One of the best things that we can do to create that culture is first and foremost, start to look at where your sources of ideas are coming from. Are your sources of ideas, for example, like in a team meeting, are they only coming from the loudest contributors? Are they only coming from contributors of a certain tenure, of a certain background, within a certain role? That is one of the first things you can start to look at. And these are ideas, suggestions, questions, whatever that thing happens to be, because when you don't try to upset that paradigm, you continue to reinforce that those people, those ideas are what is most important in your culture. And that means creating intentional moments where you're asking people who haven't spoken up for their feedback. You're acknowledging that some people don't feel comfortable giving that feedback off the cuff. They need some time to think about it and want to come back, or creating some opportunities to do anonymous feedback. Maybe you give everybody the opportunity to, if you're virtual, have everyone change their name in your program. So if you're in Zoom, it's really easy. Have them all change their name to the same thing. I've had one facilitator use the word honesty, and you all have honesty as your kind of name, right? And then you put your ideas in the chat. And so you can't actually tell who gave which idea, which is a really cool way to get some anonymous feedback and help it be easier, lower the barrier that people might have to feeling, like they can't put their neck out there and like it's not safe to give their honest feedback.
I think what's the best thing that's happened over the last several years is we've really starting to understand workplace culture, what it truly is. It's about their feeling and how they feel about their organization versus this, snacks and all the other things that go with it. It's about the people side of it. And that's really where it comes down to. And what you really talk about a lot is for leadership as well as the people that work in the organization. It's all about the people.
Absolutely. The people are the ones that talk with your customers. The people are the ones that have the ideas and are going to help you innovate with your business and stay fresh. And your people are the ones that are going to maintain your systems and build things in a way that have integrity and, align to your values. Your people are your most important asset.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's the footings, it's the foundations, and then you build up from there. I've talked some about people plus performance ultimately gets you the profits that you're looking for in a business. And if you don't get the people right, you're not going to get the performance, and you for sure aren't going to have the profits to go with your company. And this day and age for leaders and business owners, we have to be willing to change. The marketplace is changing, as we talked about from the very get-go, of what your people want. If not, they have options and they will leave. As we've seen over the last year and a half, is people are resigning, and people have that capability. And for teams that do not have remote and they can do remote, I would just tell you as a leader, you need to look into that and how can that work for your team? Because it also opens up a different marketplace for you, because where we were used to, I think Katie's in Seattle area, I'm in Missouri, And, we wouldn't have been able to have this conversation. Guess what? You can have teams that's working even out of the country. They don't even be in the country you are, and you get the expertise and get the people to be able to do that. So I think that's the thing we have to all realize. Katie, it's been a great conversation. I really appreciate you joining us. Now, would you share with them, because you have a website, I know, and share that with them? And also you talked about you may have something that you're willing to share with our chargers.
You can find me at McLaughlinMethod.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, both as Katie McLaughlin and my company, McLaughlin Method. And on my website, I have both a free offer. So I was talking about that engagement survey and how you can interpret the results and break that down into action that you can take. But I also offer single, one-on-one sessions for leaders. And the first session is a discounted session. So, that's a great way to break down and get a taste of this work and kind of start to look at some of those blind spots you might have.
So I would tell you to check that out. And I know a lot of our chargers are active now and they can't write it down. Don't worry. And you're wondering about the spelling. It's all in show notes under chargepodcast.com to make it easy for you. We'll have all that there where you can reach all of our information. And Katie, I truly appreciate you sharing that with the members there of our audience. Now, I do have a couple questions, though. I don't let any guests get away. Besides, they have to go to the recharge round, we call it. And I have two questions for you. Charge is the mantra of mine. Create habits around real goals every day. Kind of what the podcast is named after. What do you think? What habit has led to success in your life?
The biggest habit that I have success with is taking time in the morning while I'm eating breakfast to kind of reflect, and I journal, I read things that are kind of inspirational and kind of get me into a good mindset. And that's been a huge benefit to me.
I love it. We get that. And I love sharing this because we probably have over 70% our audiences says some sort of morning routine versus trying to get up and you hit the snooze 3 times. And then instead, it's the only time you can protect your time of day is in that morning side of it. The next question is a little bit, we've all had failures. We'd always love to have a do-over. And as a little kid, we saw, the one that came and they did the special magical dust there and you could change that. So if you had a do-over, what would it be, Katie?
So I learned that I also struggle as a leader with micromanaging. And so one of my early direct reports that we just did not see eye to eye. I know I leaned farther into micromanaging than I meant to, and I didn't have the awareness at the time. So I feel like my do-over has often been with any new employee, trying to change that behavior.
Excellent. Well, I truly appreciate you sharing with our listeners today. Katie, it's been great to have you on the Charge podcast.
This has been so much fun. Thanks, Gary.
Chargers, now I'm going to tell you, here's what you've got to do. I always give you an action item that you can take away. Are you self-aware of yourself enough to know what type of leadership style you are? Katie's told you she's given you a survey that you can go get her on her website to be able to get that index. But really the best thing to do is asking some people that's around you. And there's other assessments you can do too to be able to find that out. But it's really about being aware. But what if you ask your team 3 questions and allow them to anonymously give that to you and give some feedback? And then after you read them, like I said, give yourself some pause, maybe Friday afternoon, do it after everybody leaves and give yourself that pause. And then Monday, come back and say, how can I help change that? Because that's going to change the culture in your organization. So I appreciate you being here, listeners. And I'm glad you came back again this week for another great podcast. Remember, we'll be back here next week. Don't forget to rate and review our podcast. That's how we keep growing. Make it a great day. We'll see you next week.
This podcast is ended, but your life doesn't just stop. To continue your inspiring journey, head over to chargepodcast.com and access all the tools and resources mentioned on today's show. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing with somebody who may also benefit from the advice provided. That's chargepodcast.com. Until next time, charge in business and life.